quickly, let me review where we've been this far. We've considered what marriage is. It's a covenant of companionship. Not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. We also saw, because it is a lifelong commitment, it is the most important decision we can make. Marriage, to a good marriage, can be a great blessing, but a bad marriage can be a hardship throughout life. We considered some of the reasons why we ought to get married. Companionship, I've already mentioned Genesis 2:18. The Lord desires godly offspring. There's no better place to train children than in a Christian household. And also desires, the only way to legitimately fulfill certain desires that we have that are natural is only in marriage, and marriage preserves moral purity, and it's the only way to do that. Who may marry? We considered one man and one woman, of course, which excludes polygamy, and of course excludes homosexuality, not two men or two women. And by the way, certainly if it ever comes to this, and I hope that it doesn't, that homosexual marriage is, let's say, made legal in the United States. I understand it is in some states right now. That doesn't mean if they do that they're actually going to be married. Two men can't get married. Two women can't get married. Marriage is something that God has ordained, and obviously He's said that as a tremendous sin. So it can't be done. Although it would still be a great sin for our nation to allow it and to, how would you say, can't think of the word I'm looking for, but to accept it, countenance it. Okay, so in order for the one man and the one woman to get married, they have to be eligible, which means they may not be bound to another, which means they must not be married to someone else. They must not be engaged to somebody else. And if they are divorced from someone else, they have to have a biblical divorce. And we'll get into that when we get into the issue of divorce at the end. To be eligible, they also need to be a believer. If one or the other is a believer, they both need to be believers. The Bible forbids an unequal yoke. A believer may not marry an unbeliever. And there was one other element that is oftentimes missing, especially today, and that is parental consent. There must be parental consent. How long the marriage lasts, we talked about. It's a lifelong decision. It's a lifelong commitment. That's why it's important that we make the right choice at the outset. And, of course, that is excluding the possibilities of adultery or desertion, which are the grounds for a divorce. And we also saw that marriage is not for the life to come. It's not eternal. It's only for this life. Okay, well, anyway, that recaps everything we've seen so far. What I'd like to do this evening is move on into the, first of all, historically, the different ways in which this union has been brought about. And I think at this point I'll just go ahead and take these items off. And let's just kind of brainstorm for a minute and consider some of the ways that these unions are actually formed historically, or are actually in the present day. Why don't we begin with historically? Can anyone think of any ways in which marriages are actually brought about? I mean, there's plenty of examples in Scripture as well. Anyone want to take a crack at it? Well, it could be. That's one way. I mean, one way that marriages come about is that they are arranged. Okay? An arranged marriage means that when the children are young, or obviously of a marriageable age, the parents will get together and they'll make an agreement that their children are going to get married when they reach a certain age, and that's the way some marriages have been constructed in history. Can you think of any other ways in different cultures something like this is done? Has anyone ever seen Fiddler on the Roof? Okay, Matchmaker. And actually, I think you have something similar in, what is it, the Mulan in the Chinese culture, where I think you have some kind of somebody who sort of trains the young women to, and then makes a match for them somehow. So I think you have this idea of matchmaker. Anything else you can think of? Brian, we're just thinking about different ways in which marriages are formed, brought together in different cultures and history and so forth. And of course we want to move from what we see as far as this goes to what we might do today with regard to courtship. Greg?
Well, you have the contemporary kind of free-for-all, I suppose.
Okay, I was going to save that one for last, but we can, let's just go ahead and put that down. We call that dating. It is sort of a free-for-all, isn't it? Because basically a couple is going to make a decision. See, in an arranged marriage, the couple really doesn't make the choice. The parents make the choice for them. With regard to the matchmaker, I think they're supposed to go along with it, but I think there obviously are cases where they don't. But you have some sort of an elderly busybody that's sort of looking around and trying to make matches. And I suppose we have that kind of thing going on in our culture as well. With dating, though, you just have the young man, the young woman making their decision based upon things they probably ought not to base that decision on. But it is a free-for-all. And Jan, you were...
Well, I was thinking in the Bible where a woman is married to a man, he dies, and so his brother...
Ah, okay.
I don't know what you call that, succession.
Yes, a Levirate. Let's see, I'm not sure if I'm going to get this correct or not. That's kind of how it sounds. You think it's an I here? Okay. I'll defer to you on that. Okay, Levirate, which, as you said, if a brother takes a wife and they don't have a child, then the brother of the deceased will marry her and raise up a child. The firstborn among them, or for them, will be given the brother's name and his inheritance. Okay, that was one actually I didn't have on my list. That's good. Any other ideas? Yes, Kathy.
I guess in some cultures there are customs to marry certain relatives or relations, cousins or something like that.
Is there? Are you aware of any specifics or? So would that be an arranged? Would that also be an arranged marriage, or would that be different?
I'm not sure. I think you have a choice of several cousins or something. I think more in situations that are like royalty. The Egyptians used to marry their sisters, you know, to preserve the royal line.
Yeah. Okay.
There were a lot of marriages. They married cousins.
Okay, so I guess that would be sort of inter-relative type marriages. Brian, did you have your hand up? Okay, Ty, did you have something?
Well, the first marriage was arranged by God, but
okay.
That was the best.
There you go.
Okay, there you have a perfectly arranged marriage. Okay. Anything else occur to anyone? I have a few other ideas. Jen.
Well, when kings would like want to take over or reach an agreement with another nation, oftentimes they would marry another.
Yeah, political marriages. Okay. What about Solomon? How many political marriages did he? Okay. Okay, so we have marriages for political reasons. Mm-hmm. Actually, along the lines of marrying within families, you do have that a lot in the Old Testament as far as keeping the land inheritance among the tribes. And then you also have a couple of examples here where Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac among his own people, so that he wouldn't intermarry among the heathen and so forth, although his own family was probably not a lot better. And then you have the same thing where Jacob goes at the requirement of his father Isaac to go to Paddan Aram also to get a wife for himself, not from the daughters of Canaan, which Esau had done, but instead from among his own people. So I think that we can do that perhaps in a relative as well.
Would that also be a subset of interfaith within the same faith?
The interrelative?
Well,
that would be what they were trying to preserve. Right. Yes, is making sure they don't. Well, yeah, for the most part, to do that. Although we find that Jacob's wives had household idols that they took with them. At least Rachel took some, and so they were worshiping other gods. So maybe we wouldn't necessarily say interfaith at that point, although it's closer than the others who were further away into idolatry, I suppose. A couple other examples. I think in Scripture you find a master might sometimes buy a woman slave and give it to his slave, his male slave, and give her to him as a wife. And there's a lot of interesting things to try to figure out on how that works in the Old Testament. But let's say a master might get, again, a wife for his slave. He might even buy a wife for himself, buy a woman who's a slave and designate her for himself or for his son. And let's see, one other example I had was Saul, when he tried to kill David. He offered Michal, his daughter. I'm not sure if that, maybe Michal might be a better way of pronouncing your name. But if he would bring 100 Philistine foreskins, and that would be the dowry for the wife. So obviously in a case like that, I suppose that wasn't very common, but the idea would be he gave his daughter away as a reward, even though he was trying to ensnare David. But that might also fall into the category of more political kind of an arrangement. And then this is where I wanted to end up, of course. What we have today is dating, which Greg has already told us is some kind of a free-for-all. Now, in each case, although I don't know if it would be true in every case, you don't always have, well, then again, I suppose you do. There has to be there has to be authority, I think, in most of these cases, if not all, whether it be the king or the father or the master. Oops. And then you also have to have consent. And that may not be true of all of these instances or not, but certainly in an arranged marriage you do have authority. And the question is, consent, I suppose, at what level is there consent? Perhaps it's an arrangement they both like. Perhaps it's one they don't like, and I think there's been certainly cases in history where they haven't liked it, they've rebelled against it, and the marriage either took place against their will or maybe didn't take place at all. In the case of a matchmaker, I'm not sure of the intricacies of that, but certainly if the movie the Fiddler on the Roof was true at all, I think in the case of all three matches, they all rebelled against those and ended up not marrying the one the matchmaker actually arranged. In the case of a Levirate, I don't think there was any choice. In these interrelative marriages, I don't know enough about it. Political marriages, I think sometimes you had a consenting daughter, sometimes you didn't, but the reason was mainly political, although you do have authority, I think, in most of those instances, and certainly in here and here. When it comes to dating, it oftentimes, unless somehow it resolves into some kind of a biblical form, you usually have just this end of things. It seems like we've moved from the authority mainly to just consent on the two that actually want to get married. But I would say to have a biblical marriage, we've already seen that these two things are very important. There has to be the consent of the authority. There has to be the consent of the two getting married. What happens if two people want to get married that are in fact eligible, but they don't have parental consent? They don't have the consent of the father. What does the Scripture say about that? What's that? That's right, they can't get married. And even in the history of the world, there have been examples where, I mentioned one that, let's see, what was the name? It was called Domestical Duties by Gouge. I think it was William Gouge, who talks about a young couple that ran away, they eloped. And the parents were not at all agreeable to this, and so the authorities sought out the couple, and when they found the couple, they separated them. The courts annulled the marriage, and they were forbidden to see each other. So the fact that they ran off and got married, even though they consented to it, the parents didn't, and so that made the marriage null. And we talked about some of the applications of that today. How would the Lord view a marriage where a couple gets married contrary to their parents' consent? Well, if the parents, when they hear about it, they abrogate that vow, then though they may be married in the eyes of the state, it's highly questionable whether they'd be married in the eyes of the Lord. I mean, the biblical truth doesn't change. It sounds strange because we're not used to thinking that way today, but that's, in essence, what you would have. So what we want to do ideally, if we want to do things biblically, we need to have both of these, don't we? We need to have consent, the consent of authority, and the consent of the, let's say, the young man and woman. And so what I'm going to suggest, as you know, is that courtship would be the way to get both of these, and I think in the best possible way. So let's take a look a little bit at what we're talking about now when we're talking about courtship as an alternative to dating. Okay, we're going to put that as 9. This will be, I think, our best option. It's not, I can't say it's necessarily the only option, but I do think it's the best option. So would someone like to take a crack at defining courtship? What are some of the elements that might be involved in a courtship? Maybe from those who have experience? If the holidays were here, I suppose they would be able to help us on that as well. Okay, so what are some of the elements we need to look for in a courtship?
You just mentioned honoring authorities over the man and the woman.
Okay. What I'm looking for, let's try to define what courtship is, and I guess we do want to honor authority, of course, and so we want to do something in a way that would allow authority to be consulted and for them to be able to look into it. Yes?
There has to be some type of an agreement.
Okay, there has to be an agreement. We could call it, let's see, the word I used was arrangement, but agreement can be the same. So let's call it agreement and arrangement/arrangement. Okay, and what are we seeking to do in this agreement or in this arrangement? Right?
You're creating a framework in which you can seek what the Lord's will is for a young man and a young woman.
Okay, so the whole purpose of the arrangement is to allow an environment where the two can learn about each other and find out, for instance, whether they would be a good match. So let's say you're creating an environment where they can see whether or not they are a good, let's just put the word here, match.
I think it's also where the parents can see if they're a good match.
Correct. Yes. So this wouldn't be just on the part of the two, but on the part of the young man and the young woman, as well as the parents. So let's say the couple and the parents, because we need both. Consent of authority and consent of the parents. Now, is this arrangement, is this a binding arrangement? Is there anything binding about it? Jerry?
I think the agreement is binding. If they enter into a relationship, it's based upon this binding.
Okay, but what does it bind them to do?
Well, I think there's a sense of authority, the permission of the parents to seek their blessing and to honor their wishes.
Okay, so there is a binding when it comes to, let's say, supervision, right? But are they bound together because they've entered into this arrangement?
No.
Okay, so in that sense, it's non-binding, so it doesn't commit to marriage, does it? So non-binding as far as to marriage. But on the other hand, is is it a level of perhaps exploration? Let's see, I suppose we actually have that in here. Is it something that is, let's say, that has more of a, I don't want to use the word, I guess we're using the word binding in several different ways here because there's different aspects of this. I mean, we are binding ourselves to be supervised, right? At least the couple is. Okay, it binds the couple to supervision, but it's non-binding to marriage. But it does have a little bit more commitment than dating, doesn't it? Because what is it that they're doing? What is it they're doing differently here than they're doing here? I mean, there's several different things. There is an agreement, an arrangement, and creating an environment to help them discover whether they're a good match, both the parents and the couple. It is supervised, and they are the couple is submitting to this supervision. It is non-binding to marriage, but what is one thing we might say that another sense in which they are binding themselves? I'm sorry, Jerry? Oh, Donna.
Well, there's an agreement not to court anyone else.
Okay. Okay, so let's call that, yeah, exclusive would be a good term here.
Should that go up with the word agree?
That bug is bugging me, so... okay, maybe it would under agreement arrangement. We'll call it an exclusive. All right, so that we don't double this.
I think there is, I was going to say implicit, but it's more than an implicit submission on the part of the couple to the authority. Because if you got to the end of it all and the parents would not give the blessing to the union because of things that they've seen or perceived and so on and so forth, then that should settle the issue.
Okay. Let's see, do we want to include it in something other than this or just expand that a little bit?
Well, it's more than supervision because that is there and that has to be there.
Submission to parents.
Okay, maybe what we should do is put supervision as a subset of submission. But we'll just go ahead and write in submission down here. And expand it like that. Okay. So submission, I suppose here to, let's say, well, I guess it'd be parental authority as well here. And the final say. I thought, oh, I'm sorry, Donna?
Well, maybe this is already covered, maybe it would be under match, but wouldn't there be a time of investigation, where the parents are investigating the, possible spouse of their son or daughter, and there's, so it's, there's a lot of, it should be, I think, a lot of discussion going on, and a lot of observation and investigation.
Okay, I think what you're doing is you're unpacking this right now, which is you're creating an environment in which to explore, right? To explore whether or not this is a good match here. So let's just put explore here. Actually, we can, with this one question, we can pretty much read into it everything we want to say about courtship. But let me just read what I put down as sort of an attempt to define it. And it includes, perhaps, well, we'll see if it includes all of these. A supervised, okay, the idea of supervision. A supervised non-threatening. Non-threatening because it's not binding to marriage, okay? Consensual arrangement. I think the idea of consent, it's implied here. We wouldn't be going into this if we weren't, but it's consensual on the part of the authority and of the man and the woman to enter into this, not a forced thing, but something that they are all wanting to be involved in, that allows an eligible young man and woman and their families the opportunity to explore whether they would be a good match for marriage.
Would you repeat that, please?
Actually, I was going to attempt to write it, but it's too long. Okay, a supervised, non-threatening, non-binding, consensual arrangement, and that would be, of course, of the parents and of the couple, that allows an eligible young man and young woman and their families the opportunity to explore whether they would be a good match for marriage. We're going to have to start putting up that sign before. Please turn off your cell phones. Okay. Greg?
Young man and young woman. Is that?
Oh, okay. Well, all right. It's true. It doesn't have to be young. Could be an old man or a young one. No, just kidding. Okay, we'll strike young. It doesn't necessarily. Well, no, wait a minute. Let's think about that for a minute. I suppose it doesn't have to be. We did consider certain circumstances where you may not even actually have the parental supervision if, let's say, a woman was married and either her husband dies or she gets a divorce. It's feasible that at that point, 1 Corinthians 7 indicates that she can make a choice. It doesn't say that she has to go back to her parents' home and submit to their authority. So I suppose in many cases it would be young, but I guess it depends on how we define young. I mean, a person might feasibly be in their 50s and maybe not considered to be so young and contract their first marriage. Yes?
Couldn't somebody also be older, but looking for some supervised courtship under maybe the direction of the session? Or because
Could be. Right. I suppose it is conceivable that you might go through the whole courtship arrangement, and I'm going to suggest that when you get to the point where you think it's a very good match and the parents are in favor of it, the couple's in favor of it, and they're at the point where they would like to get engaged, that they have pre-engagement counseling. And I think perhaps at that point would be a good place for the elders to step in, the pastor to counsel. But I think you're conceiving of a situation where perhaps the woman may be young or not so young, and she would like to have some supervision or like to have some authority in a situation like that. I guess there's a couple questions we need to ask. Would she be bound to create that or submit to that kind of authority, or is it just something that would be voluntary on their part? Let's say that we go the second route, and they want to do that, then I think that the elder should function as the head there. I'm just wondering whether or not it's required. They certainly don't want to usurp the parents' authority, but let's say the parents don't, they're not around or for some reason can't function in that capacity, then certainly that would be a good idea for the elders to step in. If she is, let's say, a woman whose husband died or divorced, it's quite possible that she may have the option to do either. Okay, but that's a good point. Yes, Fred?
Here's another question. Okay, so let's say that you have a young woman whose parents are not Christian.
Yes?
Well, anyway, that would fall into what Jan's talking about, because she may come to the church and ask for that.
And you may have parents that refuse to function in that role too because they didn't do it and they don't see the point of it. And of course, they won't be able to do some of these things that parents ought to do, such as test the qualifications of the young man with regard to his beliefs. They're not going to be interested in it if you're talking about non-Christian parents. So I think in a case like that, I'm not sure if we want to circumvent the parents altogether, but perhaps we'd want to bring the elders in to do what the parents can't do. The fact that the parents are not Christians, I don't know that that would absolutely abrogate their right, their rights in this matter, but they may not be able to make a good decision. They might be pushing their son or their daughter towards a marriage that wouldn't be good, in which case the son or daughter would have, if they're a Christian, would have to refuse to do that on the grounds that they can't because they have to honor the Lord before they honor their parents. But I would suppose that the parents would still have authority and they would still want their parents' blessings, but there would be something that the parents wouldn't be able to do. There's also another situation. Let's say they want to marry somebody the parents doesn't want them to marry. Okay? The parents don't want them to marry that individual because they're a Christian. They think their daughter is already too much involved in this, or for whatever reason. I do think that if the parents refuse their consent, and actually we're getting ahead of ourselves, but if the parents refuse their consent, they have to have a reason to do that. I think they have to have a legitimate reason. If it's a good match, if there's no reason why they shouldn't get married, and perhaps the parents are refusing to for some sinful reason, I believe that well, this is something to think about. I believe the Puritans believe that the parents have to have a good reason to do that. Although it does appear in the Old Testament that they might do it for any reason at all. That's something we'll have to look into a little bit later. But this can get a little bit thorny, but hopefully we don't run into that situation. Okay, well, let's see. Any comments on that? We'll just move one step further then. What are the advantages of courtship over dating? What are the advantages of courtship? Why would we want to go at it this way? Kathy?
Well, dating, first of all, is not exclusive. So you have a situation where you have a man or a woman who's basically exploring relationships with many different people. And you can run into a number of negative scenarios in that. One is that you can get very committed emotionally to someone who really would be a very poor choice.
That's right. Okay. So the idea of avoiding, let's say, spelled it incorrectly. Okay, we avoid, let's say, a bad relationship if we court, and perhaps avoid an emotional entanglement.
It also minimizes the possibility of immorality.
That's right. Okay, it helps preserve purity. That's a very big one. By the way, I was going to mention this a little bit later, but during the time of the courtship, and this is probably something that doesn't happen very frequently, but I think it would be very wise, especially when we're talking about avoiding emotional entanglement with, let's say, someone who's not a good prospect. During the courtship, I do think that the couple, as much as possible, should try to guard their hearts and not allow themselves to become too emotionally entangled with each other until the decision is made that they are a good match. I mean, it's the idea of giving your heart to somebody else. You'll notice that when the commitment to get married takes place, that anything that was restraining the affection seems to kind of cut loose, and now the two begin to give themselves to each other with much more love. There's no more, I guess you'd say, fail-safes, or now they've made this commitment, they're going to do that. But courtship is not that commitment. And so you should really guard your heart. I mean, there should be, obviously, an attraction, and you want to explore this. But if the two give their hearts to one another before they've explored it, then what's the point? The idea is you want to guard yourself and keep your emotions back, your affections back, and not give your heart to the other person until you know that it's a good match and that you have the consent of your parents, and it's a good thing, you know, it's just a good thing to do. There's no way to avoid, of course, the idea that you're interested, that you like one another. You wouldn't enter into a courtship if you didn't have some level of affection. You just can't give yourself unreservedly until, give your heart over until all these things have been satisfied. Does that make sense? So again, courtship is non-binding, remember, and the thing that really, well, there are two things that bind. It's your heart is one, and And that's why you need to guard it. But the other one, of course, is when you enter into that contract, and that is binding. Oh, Greg, yes.
Another advantage is that it brings some wisdom and experience into a situation where otherwise rose-tinted spectacles tend to dominate.
And those rose-colored glasses get donned when the heart gives over, which we got to guard against. But how many young people can do that, right? So we do need the wisdom from the authority. We need some level of objectivity, which is something that the couple has a very difficult time with. And there you have that with that, okay? Is it conceivable in a dating situation that a young couple could actually get engaged before the parents even know anything about it? So what does courtship also guard? I mean, certainly you want this objectivity, you want this wisdom included to help you make that decision. But what else then does courtship guard? Okay. It guards against foolish vows, and it honors, which would be the positive way of putting it, it honors the authority of the parents, or headship. In this case, women with heads.
I think it also, struggling to think of the way to put this, especially after that last comment, but it becomes a matter of the family. Instead of something going off and budding and doing its own thing over here, from personal experience, it becomes a matter of the parents working together with the children to seek God's will, and if it is God's will, to help to bring it about. Which is a very different situation in dating, when a couple goes off and makes a decision and comes back and presents you with the bill for the wedding, as it were.
Yeah. They've already entered into a commitment, and by the way, there is a biblical fail-safe for that, but whether or not the couple would honor it, and that is, the day that the father hears of the vow, he can annul it. That's the law in the Old Testament. I don't see anything necessarily changes that. As a matter of fact, 1 Corinthians 7, as we saw, indicates that the father still has that authority over his daughter, either to give or to withhold her. But again, the idea of wisdom and objectivity here from parental insight, and also when we talk about compatibility, who is it that's actually getting joined here? Is it just the couple? No. Families. So you get also the opportunity to check out the compatibility not only of the couple but also of the family, because there are actually two families that are going to be wedding. So I might say, in a certain regard, compatibility of families. But you have again that oversight, and you have that objectivity, you have that wisdom, and you have that opportunity for the head, as well, the authority, as well as the young couple to examine that area of compatibility. Is it a good match? Is it not? Now, of course, you can run into all kinds of thorny problems if, let's say, she's a Christian, but her parents aren't, or something like that. You run into difficulties. But anyway, is it important? It may not be the absolute end-all of everything if the families aren't compatible, but would you say that it would be to your advantage if they are? Yes. Okay. Anything else with regard to advantages? Preserves purity. Oh, I had one other one. When it really comes down to it, because the couple is much less objective, one of the things that the parents can help is to help determine whether or not the person ultimately is eligible, whether or not they're a true believer. Okay, it helps to ensure what I would say, or what I would call as marriage in the Lord. But that's, of course, one of the most important things we're talking about with regard to objectivity. We're usually thinking about compatibility. We're thinking about other things. Can this young man provide? There's all those types of things. But let's not forget, we want to make sure that our children enter into a marriage relationship with another believer. And with a courtship situation, you do have that also as a part of the parental objectivity, to be able to examine that person. And as far as we can tell, are they a genuine believer? And not just leave it up to the fact that they're a member of a church somewhere. Membership, is based on a lot of different things today, and it may not be based on something you would consider to be irrefutable evidence, or at least strong evidence that the person's a believer. Jan?
And wouldn't that be the primary compatibility issue?
Right. Especially if they want to enter into it and the person is saying, I'm not a Christian, then you can stop it right there. Okay, so preserving unity, helping ensure in marriage in the Lord, not giving consent, of course, to any kind of a courtship that isn't between let's say two believers. Compatibility between spouses and families, giving added wisdom, parents also considering whether or not it's a good match, and then it honors biblical headship by giving the father the opportunity to decide whether or not he's going to consent to the wedding. So there's a lot of things that go into this, but the thing is that there's always that potential that our children will just simply say, well, it's kind of like Samson, I like the way she looks, get her for me, this kind of thing. But there's a lot more that goes into it, that needs to go into it, and I hope that our children will understand that this is all meant to help ensure them the happiest life they could possibly have after marriage. There's a lot of this that goes on today, and this is one of the reasons why you have so many people getting divorced, is because they were not a good match. And there's a lot of things that go into a good match, and we'll talk about that also. But are there any questions about this so far? Yes.
Now, what would you do if, would you go through the same thing if you had children who were not professing?
That's a tough question. Would you go through the same thing if you have children that are not professing Christians? I have to wrestle with the idea, would I give, my daughter away, who is not a Christian, to a man who is not a Christian? I haven't answered that question yet. My heart says no, you see. So I think that that's the way I'm tending. Yeah, I wouldn't even consider it. Does that mean I would never give her away if she never is converted? Well, that's kind of what it boils down to, isn't it? So that's why I say I have to think about that. BJ?
Of course, it's a little bit paradoxical in a sense of it's obviously crystal clear biblically that you would not give away your unbelieving child to a believer because they're unequally yoked. If you're not going to give an unbelieving child away to an unbeliever, logically there's no one that can marry. It would have to really be a case-by-case basis. So in some sense, the courtship model that you've outlined is going to be enforced no matter what.
Well,
You may come to, unless you are absolutely going to say, no, you're not to marry, period, because you're not suitable for marriage based on your lack of profession. If that's not going to be it, then you're going to allow your unbelieving child to marry an unbelieving child. But it's going to be based on some model like this, where you're actually evaluating the courtship.
well, unbelievers outside the church, of course, would be getting married, would be given in marriage and so forth. But we're talking about a situation in the church where you have unbelieving children. Would you let them get married, or would you? There's really, legally, as far as the United States is concerned, there's nothing you could do to stop them from contracting that type of marriage. But would you give your blessing to such a marriage is really the question. I really don't know how you could do that. No. Well, so anyway, we can think about that one. We're actually 5 minutes over. We'll need to draw this to a conclusion, but that's something to think about. Think about whether that's really the way to approach that, or if there's other ways you can think of that would be better. I think ultimately what would probably happen in a situation like that, if they truly are not a believer, they'd probably end up contracting a marriage, and it would just be outside the church, and you continue to pray and hope that they would be converted someday. I can see people going different directions with that, but you can see that would be a very hard situation to have to deal with. Any final questions or comments on that? Okay, next time we're going to look at how to enter into a courtship, as well as what to do during a courtship, and then how long a courtship should last. And then from there we'll move on to engagement and to the marriage itself. Okay, if there's no other questions, then let's have a word of prayer.